think that at this point in time, every time From Software releases a brand new game, the internet will have an uproar of how difficult the game is, and new articles will pop out about how a difficulty selection will be a great addition that doesn't hurt anyone, with Elden Ring Nightreign sparking a similar discussion, but on a different matter, since this game can be played either on solo queue or in multiplayer, with many opinions stating that one side is a tougher experience than the other, and where both sides have their pros and cons, this game's Platinum Trophy experience can be summed up in just 2 words: skill check.
Let's see how powerful you are without your magic.
Now, I'm going to start off by stating that although I've played all of the previous Souls games before Nightreign, I am not a professional player or a speedrunner that knows all of the ins and outs of these games. Trust me, even the newer or older From Software games, I still manage to get killed when playing, especially if it is my very first playthrough. Elden Ring Nightreign wasn't any different in the first games I had, especially since I hadn't played Elden Ring after the DLC released a year ago, so I had to relearn most of the controls alongside the new movement options that are introduced in this game, in which I was glad that when I booted up the game for the first time, a tutorial level was given to me to both reintroduce myself to Elden Ring's established controls and Nightrein's additional gimmicks that would be used for the entire game. And I'm not ashamed to admit it, I got my ass kicked by Morgoth in the tutorial level, but this would also grant me my very first trophy for reaching Nightrein's roundtable hold. In other words, this was the participation award. But now that I got properly introduced to the game, it was time to go into my very first solo expedition, and the result was the same as like in the tutorial. I got killed in day 1 after playing like I would in base Elden Ring, not knowing how Nightreign actually functioned. But although I lost in my very first expedition, I was awarded with my very first relics, and after equipping them, it gave me my second trophy. Now it was just a matter of not giving up in my future expeditions and keep on pushing through. At this point in time, I wasn't getting much progress done in solo expeditions, mostly due to me being out of practice from Elden Ring as a whole, with my best performance only getting me to the last boss in day 2, so I decided to put my pride away for the time being and try out another expedition, but this time in multiplayer with randoms. And like myself, most randoms that I ended up matching up with were also struggling, but I would still play out the expedition with them to see what other things I could learn from them to take in my future solo expeditions later on. And in one multiplayer expedition, I ended up getting 2 trophies that I wasn't aware of, one for completing the oldest jail, and another for defeating 10 or more great enemies in a single expedition. Although I got these trophies in a multiplayer session, I can definitely state that I would have ended up getting these on my own way later on in future solo expeditions due to the experience I would need to get all the trophies on my own. Now, at some point during my expeditions, I ended up getting the old pocket watch relic, and for some reason, I ended up wanting to talk to the priestess to see if she had any other bits of dialogue, in which I noticed that there was a brand new option available for her, and after handing her the old pocket watch, she ended up revealing herself to be another playable character, the Duchess. After that reveal, I decided to go to the Jar Bazaar to buy extra relics and noticed a different relic available for sale and thought it would be pretty helpful for me in future runs, so I ended up buying it with all the merc I had from my previous expeditions. And after buying the relic, I felt the urge to just explore the round table, mostly because I hadn't really checked the entire place out, in which I ended up spotting a ghostly figure just hanging out in the corner, so I did the most logical thing: interact with it. This ended up bringing me to the tutorial level to defeat the Night Idol, in which after defeating her, ended up unlocking the last playable character, the Revenant. I'll be talking about each Nightfarer individually later on, as I will need to use all of these characters at least once for a trophy, but before I ended that day, I got one final trophy in an expedition for getting 8 flash charges, and like the other oldest jail and great enemies trophies, I would end up getting these flash charges in my solo expeditions later on as well. So, a brand new day came, alongside an update that gave solo expedition players an extra life at the beginning of each run, which actually helped out a lot, since before, you would have to buy a Wending Grace from a merchant to get this extra life. It was still possible to beat a solo expedition without this extra life that was given in the update, but it definitely was a harder task, especially if you weren't extremely experienced at the game already. But it was thanks to this update that made me go for the rest of the trophies in solo expeditions, with the exception of one other trophy I accidentally got in multiplayer. But with this update, I was able to get my very first solo victory after some attempts against the first Nightlord, Gladius. This also granted me a trophy for beating the first expedition that was available to me, while giving me another trophy for having the other Nightlords available to me. And once the cutscene was over, I went over to the Jar Bazaar to get myself a new vessel and equip different colored relics for another trophy. Remember how I mentioned that I would be needing to use all Nightfarers at least once for a trophy? Well, this is the expedition that I decided to use the Revenant, since I consider Gladius to be the second easiest boss of the entire game. And from my own experience using Revenant, she's a pretty fun character to use due to the summons she's capable of using to get the attention away from her, as she's extremely fragile and can get one-shotted if you're not careful. Although it's extremely goofy to see a little gremlin running around with a colossal weapon, she definitely benefits a lot more from her starting weapon and anything else that has faith associated with it. Though you do need to have some Starlight Shard at hand to replenish your FP consistently, and it's definitely a character that can be hard to use in solo expeditions due to how squishy she is even at a higher level. Her ultimate, on the other hand, is one that I didn't understand at first when doing solo expeditions, but then noticed that it gave immortality for a short period of time to both yourself and your teammates. It also helps that it revives your teammates upon activation regardless of how many times they've been knocked down. Now that I was able to select any Nightlord that was available to me, I decided to just go down the list, and my next expedition was going to be for Gaping Jaw, with the Nightlord being Adele. Now that I had a better feel for how Nightreign worked, I was able to reach the boss on my first attempt, but sadly got killed when fighting it. One thing to note about Nightreign is that if you do end up losing against the expedition's main boss, you do have to do the entire expedition from the very beginning. You thought that the salty rumbacks from the original Dark Souls were bad? You clearly haven't experienced Nightrein's salty rumbacks. It was after a couple of attempts that I was able to defeat Adele and earn myself another trophy for defeating the second Nightlord. And shortly after that victory, I decided to go for another multiplayer expedition as the Revenant due to me starting her Remembrance, which ended up with me earning a trophy for acquiring a legendary weapon from a random drop after defeating a boss. Yeah, don't ask me why that particular weapon appeared for me. This can suddenly just happen while in expeditions. But regardless of me earning that trophy, I was able to complete the Revenant's Remembrance and earn myself another trophy for simply changing my outfit in the Round Table's dresser. Since the second Nightlord is already taken down and its respective trophy is already earned, it's time for me to speak about another Nightfarer to take down this boss once again, with the chosen Nightfarer being the Duchess. I personally didn't like Duchess at first, since I wasn't used to having to constantly dodge attacks as opposed to parrying in Elden Ring. With Bloodborne being the last game that I had to dodge consistently for counterattacking, you would think it would have been extremely easy for me to just pick her up immediately. But this wasn't the case at first, since like Revenant, she's extremely squishy and I would get way too trigger happy with wanting to attack too much, which would normally result in me getting wrecked. But after trying her out in more expeditions, I got the hang of her playstyle and was timing my attacks to ensure I wouldn't get caught in the middle of an attacking animation to then use her ability, which, by the way, is extremely busted and definitely one of the best ones in the game for duplicating the damage you gave to the enemy. Her ultimate, on the other hand, is pretty situational in solo expeditions, but it does give a good break for you to heal up before going back into the action. The next day came and so more expeditions for me to do, with the next expedition being the Sentient Pest, with the Nightlord being Noster, and one that I personally hated the first time I faced it in battle. It was at this point during the game that I was introduced to the raids, with my first one being the Augur raid. Little did I know that this raid boss was actually the next Nightlord I would be needing to take down. But regardless of me not knowing this, I was able to complete the raid on my first attempt with Wylder and earn its respective trophy. You can imagine how much I had to chase this thing around as a full melee character. There were also other times that I would get this raid while I was in the middle of another boss battle, which would teleport me to another place in the map without warning. And trust me, it was annoying when it happened, but those rooms definitely paid off. This was also the expedition that I would get a blast from the past, with me finally encountering a couple of the Dark Souls 1 and 2 bosses at the end of a day. I admit that these were an extremely great addition to the game for anyone that has already played the previous Souls games, though you can definitely see how outdated their moveset is compared to Elden Ring's, but I'm still glad that they kept them the same as in their original titles, alongside their respective boss themes and victory title upon beating them. But I will say that I really hope they add more bosses from the Souls series and other recent titles if possible, because unfortunately, there's only 2 bosses from each Dark Souls game available at the time I was earning the platinum. After having lost quite a couple of times against Noster, I was finally able to take them both down with just a sliver of health and earn myself another trophy. Not my proudest win, but I'll take it. But this wouldn't be the last time I would be facing this boss, as like with Revenant and Duchess, it was time for me to use another Nightfarer to take them down once again, with my pick being Ironeye. And I think it's no surprise to anyone that's played this game already that Ironeye is the easiest character to use, with his only exceptions being that shooting arrows at very sturdy enemies takes ages to clear, and enemies that can quickly close the distance on you can add a lot of pressure, but his ability definitely helps for both adding extra damage to the marked enemy while simultaneously giving you a lot of space to continue blasting them. Ironeye is definitely a character I didn't expect to like, but it sure feels pretty good to blast everyone with a bow that has infinite arrows and having an ultimate that's essentially a cannon to clear out everyone in its path. Now that the 3rd Nightlord was defeated, it was time to go for the 4th boss in the Augur expedition, with the boss being Maris. It was at this point during the game that I started to go for the Shifting Earth events. I unfortunately missed out on the Crater Shifting Earth event since I was still new to the game and didn't really know how much these would benefit me in my expeditions, but I still proceeded to search out the secret of the mountaintop for its respective trophy and celebrated for a bit before seeing that the circle was closing in on me. And although I got the secret before the end of the day, I still ended up losing against the Nightlord due to me being unprepared with its weakness to interrupt an attack that would take me down. Since I just mentioned boss weaknesses, this is one of the aspects of Nightreign that I really enjoy. The game straight up tells you what each of the Nightlord's elemental weakness is, so a lot of my expeditions would take focus on searching for a weapon with that element or equipping a relic that gives my starting weapon the Nightlord's elemental weakness to avoid depending on the expedition's RNG and already have the element ready. Although it doesn't break the boss like in the Mega Man game, it definitely helps in stopping an extremely strong attack that would otherwise be unblockable and avoid taking damage. But even if you don't have the weakness, you are still able to take down the Nightlord if you're skilled enough and know how to use your character's abilities properly. With this in mind, I was able to take down Maris on my 2nd attempt without much trouble and earn myself its respective trophy. And this wasn't the only trophy I got from this expedition, as since I just defeated 4 Nightlords, I earned an additional trophy for now having access to take down the final Nightlord of the game. I find it extremely weird that you're able to go into the final boss after just taking down half of the Nightlords, but hey, I was still going to keep going down the list before facing it. Since 4 Nightlords have been taken down, it's time for me to speak about the Nightfarer I chose to take down this boss once again, the Recluse. I won't lie, I struggled a lot when I first started playing as Recluse, since in every Souls game up to this point, I've never been a spellcaster, so I had to learn how to use the majority of the spells that are available to her. It would be harder for me in solo expeditions, since her ability to create magic cocktails after absorbing magic would take a while to activate, and I would be left completely wide open for an attack to hit me. This definitely gets easier when playing in multiplayer, since you're not always the primary target. But there are a lot of combinations that could be done with this magic cocktail, creating a lot of cool spells that are a joy to witness. And her ultimate is one that benefits herself and the entire team by being able to recover both HP and FP with each hit that connects with an enemy that's being marked. I also learned that Carrion Slicer is absolutely goated, and it carried me a lot in my expeditions. Although the final Nightlord was already available to me at this point in time, I still went on to do the Equilibrious Beast Expedition to take down both the hardest and most chaotic Nightlord of the game, Libra. This was also the expedition that the Sentient Pest raid would trigger for me once again. I had a couple of encounters with this raid in previous expeditions, but could never find out where the boss was to complete the raid. Turns out that you just have to follow where the locusts go after they finish their AoE attack. Now where they head afterwards can sometimes be in areas that are on the other side of the map or in sections that the circle has already closed. But I will say that the runes and additional bonus it gives upon completing the event make it completely worth it. I was definitely caught off guard by how aggressive Libra was, so I ended up losing the battle against him. So you know the drill, start the expedition from the very beginning to make my way back to the salty runback. Unfortunately for this fight in particular, I didn't have any elemental weakness equipped no matter how many times I searched in areas that have that specific element available, and my starting weapon didn't have that option available either, so it was just going to be a massive skill check. And after a couple of attempts, I was able to secure my victory against Libra and earn my trophy for completing the expedition. Now that Libra is out of the picture, it's time to talk about the Nightfarer I chose to give him his salty runback, the Executor. This character can be summed up pretty quick. He's essentially the Sekiro of the group, so I was able to get the hang of his playstyle extremely quick. One thing to note about his deflect ability is that it's way easier to do than in Sekiro, but although it was easier, having to pull out the katana that's used to activate his stance was pretty awkward at first. It doesn't help that using his stance to take down enemies one-on-one can take an extremely long time, and in a game that time is literally what will determine how your expedition will turn out, I would just play the game like with Wylder, but using more katanas to deal damage quickly. But Executor does shine a lot more when dealing with night bosses and the expedition's Nightlord, since time isn't taken into consideration, so using his stance to play the game like Sekiro really shows how good he can be in duels. Plus the added bonus that his ultimate gives him a full restore to continue the assault on the enemy. It was at this point in time that the very first ever Dark Sovereign expedition had gone live, so I decided to give it a try. But one thing to note is that completing this expedition doesn't grant a trophy, but it does grant other trophies if you're still pending progress from them, in which I ended up completing another Shifting Earth event, with the map shifting to the Rotted Woods. If you've played Elden Ring, you should know that rot is still pretty annoying, but it's not as hardcore in Nightreign, as there are plenty of rot healing plants around the area to reset your rot buildup. The secret from this Shifting Earth is pretty valuable, as it completely negates all the rot status effects plus receiving the rally system from Bloodborne. One thing to remember about these events is that the final circle is always going to be inside the Shifting Earth area, so it's best to get the secret to avoid having to deal with the rot effect during the night boss. This would also be the time that I ended up getting another trophy, with this one being for another raid, and one that always happened to occur in the worst spots possible. The raid I'm referring to is the Fell Omen raid. In short, this raid consists of Morgoth appearing in the middle of your expedition. Sometimes he can appear while you're running around the map, or while you're in the middle of an encounter, and it doesn't matter how much you run away from him, if he's already raiding you, you're not getting away from him. Want to know how I know this? Well, I tried running away from him since I needed to go get to a grace, and he didn't stop teleporting to my location. Have I mentioned that this is the one raid I hate getting? But even though I hate this raid, I was awarded another trophy for defeating him, so it wasn't all that bad. Right after that raid, I had decided to go for the trophy for defeating 3 Nightlords in a row. Keep in mind that I couldn't just beat the same Nightlord 3 times in a row. It had to be a different Nightlord in each expedition, or the trophy wouldn't be awarded to me. The order I chose was Adele, Gladius, and finally Maris. And my opportunity to get this trophy started after I managed to defeat the Everdark version of Adele. Yep, Going for Everdark versions of bosses also count towards this trophy, provided you're willing to do that version of the Nightlord. But doing the regular version also counts, as long as you're not repeating the same Nightlord. After I defeated Adele, I wasted no time and went on to do the Tricephalos expedition to take down Gladius once again. And at this point in time, I already had a lot more experience on how the game worked, so I was able to prepare with the Nightlord's weakness at the start of the expedition. But that didn't mean it was going to be a cakewalk, as I still had to beat the night bosses, alongside any raids that could occur in the middle of the expedition. And if I wasn't prepared to deal with whatever came my way and ended up dying in either a night boss or the Nightlord, the trophy wouldn't be awarded to me and I would need to start from the beginning. Fast forward to the Augur expedition after I defeated Gladius once again. This would either be my final expedition to earn this trophy, or it could be the one that would end the run and I would be forced to start from the beginning. Keep in mind that expeditions can take between 30 and 40 minutes. Some could be a little longer too, depending on how long I would take on each night boss and if I decided to do a little extra leveling up before going into the final battle. So losing at any point in time would cause me to lose at least 1 hour of real time. But thankfully for me, this wasn't the case, as I was able to complete all 3 expeditions in a row on my first attempt and earn this trophy without much issue. Goes to show that the experience I had with the game so far really paid off for the long run. I took a small break after earning the trophy for clearing 3 expeditions in a row and then went on to the Darkdrift Night expedition to take down its respective Nightlord, Fulgor. In this expedition and the ones that came afterwards, tougher night bosses were now starting to show up, which makes me glad that I decided to go down the list and not jump between all the expeditions and have a harder time. This expedition really showed me how much I had learned from all my previous attempts and had definitely gotten a lot better at the game. At this point, you should probably already know what happened to me once I reached the Nightlord.
Let me guess. He died?
But guess what? I didn't die. I actually ended up defeating Fulgor on my very first attempt. I found him to be extremely easy to deal with. It also helped that I was already prepared with his elemental weakness since the beginning of the expedition, and I was able to see his attacks wind up to dodge appropriately the majority of the time. Looks like all the time I've spent in having to wait for attacks to activate so I can parry them really paid off for this one. But hey, I figured I would give Fulgor his salty run back, but with a different Nightfarer, with the one I chose being Raider. In short, Raider is extremely powerful and I found him extremely easy to use, especially since his weapon of choice is colossal weapons, so it was pretty common to stagger enemies extremely quick. I didn't really have much of an issue using his weapon of choice, but the same could not be said for his ability. It's pretty easy to use now after I've done more expeditions with him, but in the beginning, I had absolutely no idea how it worked and how powerful it really was. And his ultimate is actually pretty good to give you some space if needed to then continue the assault. But I will say, he takes 10 business days to land a charged heavy attack. So props to you if you're able to land this on an enemy that doesn't just move out of the way. Oh yeah, I also beat Fulgor on my first try with Raider. Turns out it wasn't luck that I managed to beat him with Wylder on my very first attempt. Now that 6 out of the 8 Nightlords have been defeated, it was time to go for the penultimate expedition, that being the Fissure in the Fog expedition, with the Nightlord being Caligo. You know, at this point in the video, you would think that nothing new would happen during these expeditions, but this is where you would be wrong, as during this expedition, I ended up getting raided by Libra. Yeah, you heard me. The Nightlord Libra can sometimes show up in the middle of your expedition and curse you, having you either pay the runes he requires to be satisfied or having a permanent debuff for the entire expedition. In the moment that Libra showed up in my expedition, I had to pay him a large amount of runes right after leveling up, so I had to make quick work of a great enemy that was extremely close to his location and pay him to lift the curse away. This not only removed the curse, but it also grants both a buff that has either very little or no debuff at all for free. I mean, technically I did pay him, but whatever. But it also awarded me with a trophy for completing his raid. But this wouldn't be the last time I will be getting raided by Libra. It was in this same expedition that I managed to make it all the way to the Nightlord, so the extra buff was definitely going to help out a lot in this boss battle. And like with Fulgor, I ended up defeating Caligo on my very first attempt. But looking back at it now, I probably ended up getting my win because I had a bit too many buffs and revives at hand. And this theory would be proved either right or wrong when I fought this boss once again, but with another Nightfarer. Also, before I go into the rematch, I gotta say that this Nightlord is absolute cinema. The Nightfarer I chose to take on this Nightlord once again was with Guardian. Oh boy, where do I start with this dude? Or bird, whatever. In the beginning, I really struggled a lot with Guardian, especially since I personally didn't like using his weapon of choice, the halberd. I knew this character was all about tanking hits to then return the attack to the enemy, but in solo expeditions, I would get overwhelmed by all the attacks that came at me. It didn't help that since I chose this expedition as opposed to an earlier one, the difficulty spike really made it tougher to complete. I also didn't know how to use his ability properly since it was just a wind attack, but that would definitely change after I started doing his remembrance and got rewarded with relics that really make all of his abilities shine. Now, after finishing his remembrance and getting more experience by doing more expeditions with Guardian, I can say that he's definitely a character that takes a lot of patience to really understand his playstyle. The way I ended up using him was by using his whirlwind ability to interrupt an enemy's attack to then do a charged heavy attack to stagger them. And if you have a relic that upgrades his whirlwind, you'll be able to guarantee a stagger to most enemies, since it stays active for an extremely long time. Combining that with another relic that adds a whirlwind effect after doing a charged heavy attack, it would allow me to stagger enemies and bosses extremely quick, letting me keep the pressure going against them. And his ultimate, although it doesn't do a lot of damage, it's great for reviving your teammates in multiplayer. And in solo queue, I will use its extended iframes to completely avoid an attack that would otherwise do a lot of damage to me and also keep the pressure going. Guardian was a character that I at first hated to use, but now I personally like how his moveset, no pun intended, flows like the wind. And although halberds still aren't my personal choice of weapon, I do enjoy using them with him. And before I forget, the match with Caligo went well with Guardian after learning all of this through expeditions. At this point in time, I only had one Nightlord left, that being the final boss. So before I went off to face off against him, I decided to do a little cleanup on any miscellaneous trophies I had left before finishing the game's main objective. Thankfully for me, another Shifting Earth event had just activated, and it was the only one that I hadn't explored yet, the city of Noclitio. I'm going to be honest, I got lost a lot of times trying to figure out where to go to find the secret to get my trophy. It also didn't help that sometimes I would get raided and have my progress temporarily stopped. But although my objective to find the secret of Noclitio got stopped in this expedition, I ended up getting a different trophy, which was to have a rare weapon and medallion in each slot of my inventory. To add a little extra detail to this trophy, the way I figured out that I had a rare weapon was by either checking if that weapon didn't need any more smithing stones to upgrade it, or if the weapon already had a purple or gold background upon collecting it. The medallions would only need to have either a blue or purple background to count as rare equipment. And I don't know if this trophy only pops after defeating the second night boss, since I actually already had rare equipment before defeating the night boss. So my guess is that you need to have rare equipment in your inventory after defeating the second night boss and before going into the third day. After earning that trophy, I went on to re-explore the city of Noclitio to get the secret before the event ended. One thing I did forget to mention about the shifting earth events is that you do have limited expeditions for each event before they disappear for a while, so it's best to make time to get the secret before it's too late. Also keep in mind that there are 4 shifting earth events and you can't choose which one you want for your expedition. With this in mind, I kept exploring the city until I finally reached the church at the end of the city, where I was greeted with a familiar face before defeating them. I will say that after I defeated Adele, I almost booked it out of the area until I noticed that the trophy hadn't popped. Turns out that I still hadn't picked up the secret, so I bolted towards the treasure at the end of the church to pick up the secret and earn my trophy. It would have been a disaster if I would have gone through all that trouble just to miss it at the very end. By the way, the secret was an extra life with additional buffs, so it's definitely a secret that's worth getting for any expedition, provided you don't lose a lot of time trying to get there. Once I earned that trophy, it took a couple of completed expeditions to finally get the very first shifting earth event that I had gotten at the very beginning of my playthrough. But this time, I had a lot more experience and now knew how these events worked, so I wasted no time in searching for the final secret that I needed to earn 2 trophies. If I thought that Naklatio was confusing, the crater was a maze of its own, especially when having to both go deeper underground for an extended amount of time and having to face 2 bosses to finally get the secret. Time was definitely something that I needed to earn this secret, but with a lot of persistence, I was able to acquire both the secret of the crater, which was a free legendary upgrade for any weapon I had in my inventory, and 2 trophies, one for getting the crater secret and another for getting the secrets for all of the shifting earth events. This would also conclude all of the RNG related trophies. The rest would all need to be completed by pure skill. There were only a couple of trophies left for me to obtain the platinum, with one that became very simple after all the experience I had at this point in time. I'm referring to reaching level 15 in an expedition. Yep, I have beaten all the Nightlords without reaching level 15, even after getting either a shifting earth bonus or a raid bonus. And it was at this point that I noticed that there was nothing to be afraid of when going into the outside area of the circle after day 2 ended. The only thing that I would need to be aware of when going into the outside area was the consistent HP drain effect that would always kill me after some time had passed. Although I would still lose my runes upon dying and would need to pick them up again, there really isn't much of a penalty in doing this. With the exception of some great enemies and unopened Evergills, all of the area bosses and enemies would still be roaming around the map, so I would still be able to take them down to squeeze out a few more levels before going into the expedition's Nightlord. There would be times in other expeditions that I would spend almost 30 minutes doing this process because a lot of areas would be close to the inner circle that I respawned in. So this would really be a matter of, should I squeeze out a couple more levels or just go with the level I'm currently at? In any case, this trophy was now mine, and there were only a few left to finish this platinum expedition. Shortly after earning the level 15 trophy, I had finally earned the trophy for defeating a Nightlord with all available Nightfarers. Yeah, remember that trophy? Yep. I had actually earned this trophy when I had defeated Libra with Executor, but there really isn't much for me to say about this trophy. It's pretty straightforward, and I didn't need to defeat the final boss for it, since I could just beat all of the other Nightlords with them. But now, it was time to go into the final expedition for the final battle and earn the last trophies I needed to finish the Platinum Trophies expedition. The final expedition, Night Aspect, was actually not that different from all the other expeditions I had done so far, which, you know, is kind of disappointing since it technically is the last level of the game. I still proceeded like all the others, but this time, all of the experience I had accumulated so far made a big difference, as opposed if I was still a beginner. Now, that didn't mean that there weren't any obstacles that didn't try to halt my progress. Since this is the last expedition available, any boss could appear during the end of either day, whether it be an easy one or a hard one, so my personal experience with this game would be tested until the very end, which also includes taking down the final Nightlord, Heelster. I admit that I got killed the first time I ever faced them. The kill streak I had so far had finally ended with this guy breaking it. But now that I had a sense of what his moveset is, I beat the 2 base of the expedition to get my salty run back, and this time, I ended up winning the battle, earning my trophy for defeating him, and another for defeating all of the Nightlords. And then, I proceeded to earn another trophy for reaching the game's main ending, is what I would love to say, but no. Turns out I had the silver tier relic equipped on Wylder, which if you don't know, triggers his remembrance ending as opposed to the main ending of the game. So guess what? I was going to have to beat the final expedition once again, but this time making sure I didn't have the silver tier relic equipped on me. Although I had to redo the final expedition, there was one trophy that I could get even after getting Wylder's remembrance ending, and that was to buy all of the available vessels from the Jar Bazaar, in which I was able to buy them immediately with all of the merc I had accumulated. So now it was time to go into the final expedition one last time and come out with not only the trophy for the main ending, but also the platinum trophy. This Platinum Trophy expedition really gave me one of the best skill checks I've had to do recently, and one that I'm glad I was able to complete on my own. But before I go into more detail about that and the hardest trophies, I have to talk about my personal favorite Nightfarer and the one I used to complete all expeditions, Wylder. I think it's safe to assume that he's the character that most players, including myself, really like to use for their expedition, and it's pretty easy to see why he's also the main character of the entire game. His entire moveset was meant to show how Nightreign works. His ability to use a grappling hook is amazing for both traversing extremely fast and to close the gap he has between enemies. He was definitely the one Nightfarer that got me hooked into playing more after getting a better understanding of how the game actually functioned. With him being able to use most of the weapons in the game, it was extremely easy for me to get his playstyle, and his ultimate is one that has gotten me out of a lot of tight situations in expeditions. Now that the Platinum Trophies expedition is over, I think it's a good time to reflect on my personal top 3 hardest trophies to earn. Do keep in mind that these will be ranked from a solo player's perspective, so your personal skill level will determine if these are either harder or easier to earn. Third place goes to Shifting Earth. The thing that makes this trophy hard to earn is the fact that you have to depend on RNG to get the Shifting Earth event that you're missing. Even after earning the Platinum, there are times that I don't get to see a Shifting Earth event for quite some time. Knowing that you're on a time limit to get a Shifting Earth's respective secret can make it a daunting task. Second place goes to A Champion's Path. This one can be switched with the number 1 spot, since playing as every Nightfarer to defeat a Nightlord isn't really an easy task. Some Nightfarers are a completely different playstyle that you may not be used to, and this trophy can sometimes feel like an uphill battle with trying to both learn the Nightfarer's playstyle and taking down the expedition Nightlord of your picking. First place goes to Nightlord Slayer. If you aren't exploring the PlayStation Plus feature of uploading your save file to the cloud to get a quick reset on your streak and doing it legitimately, this trophy is a true test of skill, adaptability, and endurance. The factors being that you do have to be able to endure 30 plus minutes in each expedition without taking a break, as the game will end your session if you're AFK for an extended amount of time during day 1 or day 2. And being able to adapt on the spot for anything that may occur in the middle of your chosen expedition, whether it be raids or a night boss that you aren't too comfortable in going up against with your current equipment. The only things that make earning this trophy a little easier is that you are able to prepare with relics of your choice and go with any Nightfarer of your picking. But I can't really say for sure what can happen in your expedition, so be prepared for anything. As I mentioned at the very beginning, Elden Ring Nightreign's Platinum Trophy is a skill check, as you're always having to start from level 1 and work your way up in every expedition, dealing with whatever enemy or event happens to occur while exploring. It's definitely a Platinum that I had an amazing time doing, as it allowed me to try out a lot more different playstyles, and being able to replay any expedition with a different character is a massive plus on my end, since it helped me in learning the game at a comfortable pace. And although I've already earned the Platinum, it's definitely a game that I enjoy playing since it has a lot of replay value, as I'm always excited to go back into another expedition and see what other things I can experiment with. Now tell me, have you managed to earn this Platinum? If so, share with me your overall experience with it. I'd love to see what other players thought about it. See you in Limbo in my future expeditions.